All right, so seeing as we didn't have a session last week, I was wondering how many people had an opportunity to look at the presentation from the presentation online, chapter 3. Did anybody get a chance to look at that? No.
I did went through it, but not thorough.
Okay. Anybody else had a chance to look at it? All right. From your silence, it possibly means that you didn't. All right. So chapter 3 is where we're going to be looking at the relational leadership model in a little more detail, of which further chapters will start to look at very important elements from the model as well in a lot more detail to be able to look at the process of how it's getting done. So remember in the previous chapter, we were looking at all of the previous theories that were put forward in relation to dealing with leadership. So this particular chapter is going to be looking specifically at the model that we're looking at. And the focal point, as we can see, is going to be relationships because, well, if we look at the name of it, is always going to be based upon the nature of the relationships that developed or that are developed between leaders and the followers, as the case would be. Both from both ends, in terms of if you are in a leadership position or if you're in a subordinate position, what is the nature of the leadership relationship that you develop? So that's going to be an important element. So first off, we're going to look back and remember the definition of what leadership is. Leadership is a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. Now we have to remember that because, again, as with any discipline, we need to start by saying what it is. All right. So it involves five areas of focus for us to be able to look at the model itself. So from the text here, it says the RLM model is purposefully builds commitment towards purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of views, empowers those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all four of these elements are accomplished by being process-oriented. So what, if anything, do you understand by that last phrase, process-oriented? Anybody? Hi, Ms. Campbell.
Good afternoon.
All right. As you just arrived, let me put you on focus here. When you hear the phrase or the words process-oriented, what comes to mind? So let me ask another question to people. So draw this out a little bit. Anybody here cooks?
Many steps to follow.
Yes, sir.
All right, good. Yes, Latoya, I think you kind of hit it on the head. Process-oriented. Now, why would we want to have um, steps to follow? Why do we want that? Especially if we're looking at it like a recipe.
To mitigate any errors.
So,
To mitigate errors. Go
well,
ahead.
yeah. Well, I was going to say, so the outcome, you'll have the outcome you want.
Right. So more importantly, what you're looking for is you want to be able to repeat the process over and over again and get the result that you're looking for. So process oriented means we have to focus on the process of developing the relational leadership model, which is the important part that we're looking at here. Now, this is a visual representation of the model. So you can see the entire thing is couched in that entire circle, or what we could call the universal set of the process, which includes being inclusive, empowering, and ethical, all bound together by the purpose of the group or the organization that you're dealing with. So let's start to look at what the model is attempting to do. So it's not, I don't want us to think about it as a step-by-step process alone, or just a set of things we have to do to be able to get it, but it is going to be a process that allows us to raise our game, or to become better leaders. Now, the relational leadership model does not try to describe what's going on as in the world around us, but it is to provide a sort of model that we can develop towards. So it's almost like setting up an ideal against which we can measure the reality, but it will give us something to aim towards to be able to achieve. So it's sort of like, the ideal leader would be this particular way, so that we can end up with a situation where it's going to be, we're going to be approaching this perfection, but of course, nobody's perfect. So the aspect of it is that we start to get towards that. So the 5 key elements that we're starting to look at here, let's look at the first one is purpose. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is when you identify your purpose in life, or your purpose in an organization, it helps you to focus your attention on what you're being able to do, or how you're going to go about doing it. Now, there are other things that we have to look at, but when we look at the goals of the organization, it drives most of the other actions and activities. So if you think about yourself in particular, what are your goals in life? And how have your goals in life changed from time to time? So again, you all are going to be doing some of that exploration when you look at your self-assessments or self-evaluations. How did you arrive at the goals that you have? Maybe the first set of goals that you had were things that you developed by yourself. But as you develop in life and you got married, you had children, that type, for those of you who have families and so on, you'd find that that goal or vision that you had of yourself before the other players came into being would have had to evolve from where you started, because you need to be aware of the people that are around you. So one of the things with vision and mission statements in organizations is that, and the model is going to talk to us about the need for it to be derived from everybody's input rather than only your input alone. Person who's here. All right. Right. Okay. Ram Sarup, welcome. Okay. So now, one of the first things they talk about here is whether or not your goal, your organization is vision driven or position driven. And this is a dangerous, it's something that happens sometimes in organizations, that when you have a change in leadership in an organization, the leader drives the actions of the organization. And that could be dangerous depending upon who comes into the positions of leadership. Where, as opposed to that, it's probably more important for us to be more vision driven, so that regardless of who steps into the organization, the vision remains fairly focused on where you want to go. The person who's stepping into the position helps to move the organization towards that vision and not change the vision over time. This is especially true when the vision that you've developed is one that was developed utilizing the contribution from all the individuals or all the people in the organization who would be affected by it. So that speaks to another element that we're talking about. All right, so now individuals in the leadership process need to know themselves. This is the first part of the knowing, being, doing process. So if you have a vision, you need to now start with the concept of, do I know who I am? And you have to get from the knowing to the being to the doing, which is the acting part of it. So the first part of the process that you want to get involved with after you've dealt with with the vision aspect is to begin to understand who you are, what are your values, and how do you behave. So that's kind of really important. We spoke about this in previous chapters about the knowing, being, doing aspect. Knowing yourself, knowing what is going on, being aware of how other people see you and how they perceive you, and then doing things to be able to bring whatever that vision or mission is to its fruition at any point in time. So that knowing, being, doing is critical. It's part of the getting to know each other kind of thing, to getting yourself in a position of knowledge so that you could start to influence other people. Now, the process is not going to be a one and done thing. It's more along the lines of a spiral. Where they talk about it here as being circular in nature. The components that they're talking about, knowing yourself, understanding how others see you, and acting on your understanding and behaviors and so on, is a kind of circular and spiraling thing, because as you go through the exercises of reflection and contemplation and that type of stuff, you will become more aware, and that awareness would create stronger decision making in the next go around. So instead of just being circular, because you're kind of like stuck in one path, I like to think of it as more of an outward spiral, because every time you come around, you'll become more aware of things. So you're doing the same things over and over, but you're not seeking the same results coming back. You're trying to improve yourself by having better levels of awareness, better levels of improve your actions in terms of getting it right. So again, it's a process of getting things right over time. It's not a one and done deal kind of situation that we're looking at there. They've likened the knowing, being process to the phrase head, heart, and practice. So your head is your knowledge, your base, your intellect. Your heart is your feelings, your values, your belief systems, and those two things work together to be able to determine how you actually behave, your practice. So this is something that is sort of the and the three cannot be pulled apart. The way you behave depends a lot upon what you know, who you are, knowing yourself, and what you believe in, that being aspect of yourself. Those things determine how you go about behaving. And that's where the three are interrelated. So the knowing, being, doing is likened, as I said, to the head, the heart, and the practice. And those, again, as I said, you're able to expand your knowledge. That expansion of knowledge can, in fact, lead to further developments in your value structure, changes in that. Who's this coming on? Who's that person?
Good afternoon.
Jacob. Good afternoon.
Sorry for
Makira.
being late.
That's all right. The recording is in process so that you would be able to pick up on what you missed, okay?
No problem.
All right.
Sir.
All right, cool. All right, so so as I was saying, that knowing, being, doing, likened to head, heart, and practice is one of those things, again, that as we create more knowledge about ourselves, have greater awareness, it helps to develop how we think, our value systems or belief systems, and improves our practice. So the concept is as I said before, it's circular in nature, but I think of it more like a spiral, because you're spiraling outwards with greater levels of awareness moving forward. All right, that makes sense, guys? You're seeing this correlation that they're trying to make here? feedback is going to be important, right? Now, coming back to the knowing aspect, do you think that leaders need to have specific knowledge? Let's say you're going into a business activity and you're coming into it into a leadership position. Should you know something about the business that you're involved in? Let's say you're going in as a teacher in an organization. Should you not be knowledgeable about education and teaching? Latoya?
Yes, sir.
Why do you think that?
So you can't go in, for want of better words, as a headless chicken. You can't go in lost in the environment.
Yeah. That you would think that's true in the teaching service, but that's not. Huh? A lot of people who end up in teaching actually have no specific
It's for the
training in
salary.
education. No, they don't. It's
Yeah.
not their fault. It's not their fault. Our system here
Mhm.
assumes that people know how to teach. And all you need to show that you have the ability to teach is that you have a degree.
Right,
And
yeah.
you become
And that's
eligible.
why, yeah, you have plenty problems now.
Right, because in most other countries that I have investigated, you can't become a teacher until you do something called teacher training. And in various countries, you have different aspects of it. I know in Canada, you have to have your discipline degree and you have to have a teaching degree before you can actually join the teaching service and be registered and evaluated as a teacher. So, despite that, though, we've been able to produce a fair number of good teachers, and you all would have met a number of good teachers in your lifespan, I hope. Unfortunately, you may have met just as many poor teachers along the way. Now, the reaction that we have is that students, will be willing to work with teachers that show that they know what they're doing. That's credibility. And therefore, it is required that a teacher develop the knowledge and competencies that are required for that particular job. The same thing applies to a leadership position. You can't go into a circumstance and become a leader if you have very little knowledge about what you're going to lead. Now, does that mean that you're totally ineligible to go into a situation like that? No. You can acquire knowledge and develop competencies by doing the necessary training and research that's required for you to have something that we refer to in this situation called responsible knowledge. You need to know, you don't need to know everything, but you need to know enough to understand what the job entails and what the concepts and the ideas are about in terms of being able to produce some system of being able to impart proper decisions for the organization that you're working with. So that brings us to this thing. There are 4 essential skills that are identified as. Hi, Devanan.
Yes, sir. Sorry, the call the internet dropping a bit.
All right, okay. So yeah, you went on hold. So there are four specific skill sets that are required for leaders. Interpersonal skills. This is the ability to be able to effectively communicate with people. And this is a skill that for some people it is a challenge and it's something that they have to work on. Conceptualization skills, the ability for people to be able to think creatively. That can also be a problem in the sense that some people have issues with thinking creatively, simply because of the nature of where their backgrounds in terms of where they come from, in terms of their practice and occupation. Sometimes that creates a problem, or sometimes they simply haven't been able to exercise that creativity muscle because they hadn't had the opportunities to do so. The technical skills, that would be the expertise required for the specific. So if you're going into some sort of operation, you need to know what are the specific technical skills that are required to to deal with the position that you're working with. And the last one is tactical skills. Now, tactical skills would be, as they talk about here, negotiation and human relations. These are related to effective communication, but they go beyond. I mean, how do you go about negotiating agreements in an organization between parties? How do you deal with conflict and arriving at conflict resolutions? How do you manage meetings? All those kind of soft skills. Now, the technical skills you realize are fairly easy to get to. Conceptualization really is a mindset that you have to develop, but the interpersonal and tactical skills become the very problematic ones that a lot of managers suffer with, because people come in very technically oriented and qualified and whatnot, but whether or not they can actually communicate effectively and work from a tactical point of view with each other, dealing with the different situations that present themselves, those are the skills that cause the biggest challenges in leadership, not so much the technical skills. Those are things that you'd have to develop as part of your knowing, being, doing process of development in terms of the relational leadership model. Knowing your values. So here you're talking about understanding who you are as an individual. Why is that important? Because if you know who you are likely to behave in a particular manner. So, but if you don't know who you are, or you're not sure, or worse yet, you're kind of pretending to be a particular kind of person, that those values will begin to show themselves, especially when things become difficult in an organization. So here you're talking about your character, and that type of valuing system that becomes important as a leader in an organization. So if your concern is really about making profits, then that is the kind of that's what you're going to value beyond anything else. If you're going to value the relationships that you develop with people that you work with, that is what is going to show itself as being there. And those values are what will define you as a leader in your organization. So think about the leadership you've had, leaders in the past that you've had interactions with, and try to look at what were their, what's the word I want to use? What were their underlying principles that guided their behavior, that they may or may not have been aware of. And that's something that you have to be paying attention to. You need to understand what drives you, what is important for you or to you, because those are the things that drive your behavior moving forward. And of course, the doing aspect of it would be based upon what you know and based upon your value structure, your character, and your knowledge. Then you're going to try to accomplish the things that the organization is asking you to do. So when you start to act and behave and do things, you're doing so in the context of knowing who you are, having that background information, and having your value structure, your value system govern the way you treat people, and do things. That you won't do things that are unfair. And like I remember I had an opportunity once in the organization to become to not lecture for that. For a little while I was the that is long silly post. Basically, I was the academic coordinator for the Sangre Grande campus. And when I went down there, I took it upon myself to say that I need to be very student-centered and focused on trying to bridge the gap between the administration of the organization, at least in the campus I was in, and the student body, to find a bridge between the two. And one of that was one of the things that I tried to impart on the staff that I worked with, those that fell under my purview, that our presence in the college was dependent upon the presence of the students. And we were there to facilitate students accomplishing their goals, which meant that we had to be able to facilitate their requirements and their needs, and to do so in a respectful manner that didn't belittle a student or make them feel anything was wrong with when they had questions to ask. And it shouldn't be that it was like I was doing you a favor kind of thing, that kind of stuff. So I remember trying to do that. And when I look back at this doing, I'm thinking I had a lot of technical expertise and knowledge and information. I knew what my value systems were in terms of what I was as a teacher and how I wanted that to influence the way I was doing things. And not only was I interacting with students, I was also had to interact with faculty, and some of the problems that faculty had with administration, I tried to make a bridge for that, to make sure that they got what they needed to be able to do the job they needed to do. Because that was one of the struggles that I found myself as a lecturer in the campus, having to almost battle with administration to be able to get the resources I required to be able to teach my class. Like struggling to get a projector to go in the classroom, having, a whiteboard sometimes that was clean, because sometimes you walk into a classroom and you'd find the whiteboard has this kind of horrible black marks and red marks all over it for somebody who's been doing work. So I started to institute different small little practices that would help to make the staff feel comfortable and students to feel comfortable to be able to approach me if they're having issues and deal with that kind of stuff. So that's where I was able to bring my knowledge of both as a teacher, a lecturer in the system, understanding and being knowledgeable about the administration of the organization, feeling empathetic towards both students and lecturers, and being able to do what I needed to do in order to accomplish that particular vision of what I wanted the organization to look like and how we wanted the organization to interact with these individuals, at least at that campus level. And it was quite interesting working in that environment. I learned a lot about myself during that period, and it didn't happen overnight. It took a couple of years for it to work out and to find a practice pattern for the development of that type of activity. All right. I also had the unfortunate circumstance of having to work with people who failed to act because they were either racked with indecisiveness or they had a fixation on perfection. And I can tell you that that is probably one of the most debilitating type of leader to work with. A leader who chooses not to do something either because they don't feel confident enough to do it, or they want everything to be perfect in order to get it done. And I've always found that didn't make much sense to me. But a lot of leaders operate from that feel-safe position. The reason for it is because they are afraid of the impact of making mistakes. So that was one of the things that I always said, listen, if we make mistakes along the way, we will learn together. But the whole point of making mistakes is that we take chances and try and see if we get things done. I remember doing a lot of things where it took a lot of chances to be able to get this done, and it didn't always work. And sometimes we made a mess of things, but at least we were trying to do something, and we learned lessons from the practice of trying to do one thing over the other. I know when I eventually had to leave Sandy Grande campus after a while, after the first 3 years I was there, I know a lot of the initiatives that I started in the campus ended, and nobody went forward with it for whatever reason, and I know students complained bitterly about it afterwards. It was really something bad. And that was because of this fixation on perfection, because the leadership punished people for making mistakes. And that was something that you don't want to encourage in an organization as a leader. You want to encourage people trying to do things. If they don't do it well, because, I mean, obviously they didn't know, they weren't well prepared, then that's where you can take, have some sort of discussions about it. But if you really just keep on doing that, you're going to stop people from trying to do things. If everything they're doing is bad, that is something that you have to be doing to leading for that. Now, how can you, as a leader, promote that kind of chance taking, that kind of learning potential in your organization? Well, one is by promoting your subordinates, your own learning, sorry, by participating in learning activities for yourself, which is doing additional training, joining the staff while they are doing training exercises and modules, and this was easy to do. You have some new piece of software that comes into the organization, or you're implementing some sort of change. You, as the leader, sit in the class with the students, once you say students, but with the other staff members, to do training alongside them, so that there are two things that's going to happen. You're all going to build up a better repertoire. People are going to see you as a normal individual, not somebody who sits in an office and is aloof and apart from the organization. And if they see you learning and struggling with the material just as they are, it's going to encourage them to want to help other people to learn. So I used to get assistance from my staff to assist me with certain aspects of training that we were doing. And we collectively, in the last part here, shape and contribute to a culture that promotes learning in the organization. That's important, because it means that we are not all perfect beings. Yes, we have lots of other things that we could be doing, but if you take time to do some learning together, you develop a level of collegiality that you can't escape from. And the benefits of developing that level of communication and collaboration together helps to contribute to the development of a very good base of cohesiveness in the organization. That's really something that you can look forward to doing then, in terms of promoting learning. Purposeful. So we come back to this whole concept of relational leadership is purposeful. So the first thing that they're going to talk about here is that the focus or the purpose of the organization drives the actions and behaviors of the organizations overall. And that's because the vision that you're trying to accomplish is going to be determined by the organization. Is going to focus the organization's behavior. Now, how we arrive on that is dependent upon whether or not we use either a personalized vision or a socialized vision. A better choice is to utilize socialized visions as opposed to personalized. Personalized means that is a vision that I might hold about things. Now, all of us will have our own personal vision of where we see ourselves in the organization. But the better element would be for us to focus on a socialized vision, because it would be built by utilizing the input from everybody inside the organization, helping to develop that shared vision. It also becomes much easier to sell that socialized vision to the other people in the organization. So, for example, the college has a new president. You're all aware of that, right? You all got emails indicating that there's a new president.
Yes, sir.
Right? So
Yes,
this
sir.
is, yeah, this is one thing that he's going to have to deal with, and as it's going to be interesting for me to see how he's going to treat with that. Welcome, Anrada.
Afternoon, sir. Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. You'll be able to catch up on the things that you missed out from before, okay? by looking at the recording. All right, so I was saying that the better method of developing a vision for an organization is to use a socialized approach where we get everybody to share in it. And now that we have a new president coming into the college, he's coming from a different background with a lot of international teaching experience and teaching administration. And of course, he has a lot of training as well. And it'll be interesting to see where he sits with the vision and mission statement that currently exists within the college. Now, I believe most of you all should be familiar with our vision and mission statements from the college. No, yes, you don't know. You're all familiar with the vision and mission statements of the college? These look familiar to you? To be a student-centered, dynamic, and innovative world-class and multi-campus college, promoting excellence in teaching and learning, serving diverse communities, and producing lifelong learners who can compete globally. So that's our vision. And our mission is the journey or the things we need to do to be able to accomplish that vision, to be a premier educational institution providing high quality, affordable, and accessible education programs serving the needs of business, industry, and the diverse campus communities, and facilitating the personal and professional development of its students, faculty, and staff. So if any of you have done any kind of management studies, the vision is where you want to be, the mission is the journey that or what you need to do to be able to achieve the vision. You're familiar with this, right? So this new gentleman who's coming in, that's the vision and mission statement he's going to come to meet. Now, the way in which we arrived at that vision and mission statement required the input of staff from all levels of all of the different campuses that made up COSTAT. Now, for those of you who don't know the history of COSTAT, COSTAT started with the amalgamation of 7 different institutions across Trinidad and Tobago to make up something called the National Community College. So it was made up of John Donaldson Technical, San Fernando Technical, some of these names might know, the Cipriani Labor College, the MIC Institute of Technology, the Joint Services Training Institution. Well, that's basically where they train police officers and stuff. And there was a place down in South called GVC. GVC, the Government Vocational Center. Those were the, and ECIAF. Hi, Celine, welcome. To catch up on the stuff that we were talking about. So those 7 or 8 different institutions were supposed to come together to make up this National Community College. At that time, it was called just the National Community College of Trinidad and Tobago. And to develop the vision and mission statement back then, it required the input of staff at all levels and students at all levels in each of those organizations, making contributions to develop the vision and mission statement. Eventually, what happened was that the organizations then split out with UTT coming involved, and mostly the technical colleges and stuff left with so there was a separation. UTT absorbed a lot of the technical and physical, mechanical engineering and those areas. COSTAT remained with I forgot one of the big ones. NEHUST was also one of the institutions. So NEHUST and the nursing school and all those went off together with COSTAT. So there was a division of concept at that point in time that eventually emerged. So the idea was that we have a new president coming in. He's going to come up and he's looking at a vision and mission statement that was developed from a very robust system of getting shareholder input into the development of the vision. Is he going to look at revising that vision and mission statement? It's going to be interesting. And what process will he be utilizing to be able to develop that if he chooses to, that changing that vision and mission statement. Because one of the biggest stakeholders in our vision and mission statement is the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So one of the reasons why the programs that we have exist in the college is because these are areas of need that the government has identified that is required for training purposes. So the courses and programs that have been developed were developed based upon the needs of the society around us, about especially what government services require. So you'd find that new programs will come up and then some programs will close off as they are required to change over time. But this vision and mission statement still is that I spoke about here, was developed utilizing that methodology. And this was set up since the beginning of the college, since 2000. And it has been the vision of the organization moving forward throughout all these 22 years of service of existence of the college since the year 2000. All right. Any questions on that so far? So we understand that whole concept of vision and mission and how it impacts. There is a presentation that will be dealing with this specifically in the area of vision, mission, and strategic direction. So there's a chapter presentation that's going to fall in, so you can understand why why that's important. So the purpose of an organization should not just be the vision of one individual. Lots of organizations start like that. So if you think about a lot of the success stories we hear about businesses, for example, like Ford and Microsoft and those things, those were developed based upon the vision of one or small group of individuals in that particular organization. In the modern environment where you are joining large organizations, is that vision and mission still, is it still relevant? And that's one of the things that a lot of organizations had to look at, because relevancy is going to be one of the things that is important about your purpose, because you remember your purpose or your vision is the focal point of your organization's purpose of existing. Is it relevant, or is it that it needs to change? And that's something that maybe an opportunity now for us to review the vision statement. Of course, that would be something that is necessary at this point in time, because maybe we need to change our vision a little bit. All right. So as for and as I said, there's a yes.
So I was just saying that we have going to have a new president of COSAT. So we have to give us a new vision. Right?
I don't, not necessarily. I was saying that it'll be interesting to see how he approaches it, because he can choose to work with the current vision, or he may go through an exercise in determining whether or not a new vision or an augmented vision may not be new, but he may want to augment it. But if he were to make any changes to the vision, what I'm also interested in looking at is the way in which he would go about doing something like that. How he would go about, getting the input from everybody, to be able to make sure that people feel involved with the process. Because that's one of the things when organizations make decisions, especially about where they're going in the future. A lot of times the decisions are made without the input of the people who are most affected by it. So for example, how would he bring in the student body into the decision-making process? And how would that work? Because as I said before, because of the critical nature of a vision statement and because of its input into the purpose of an organization, you need to get as many perceptions involved into the decision-making process, because if you don't do that, then you run the risk of alienating the people within your organization. And then you would get people just not bothering. You want to go over here and we are over here and have no agreement for anybody to work towards this direction. You understand? So everybody's going to be pulling against, and eventually some people might get frustrated and leave the organization as a result. The main takeaway from this is, if you are in an organization and for whatever reason you all don't have a vision and mission statement, that's something that you all should work on. Or something that if there one exists, you should go through an exercise in understanding where that vision and mission statement came from, how it was derived, and whether or not it needs to be augmented given current circumstances. And that is something that I think needs to happen. Michelle, you're quite right, because the environment from 20 years ago is very different to the position we find ourselves in today. All right, that's 2 decades plus that we're talking about there. Okay, and again, the main point here in terms of the model is that how you develop your vision and mission is going to be critical, and begins that whole process of inclusiveness that we talk about. All right, and you want to get as much input from everybody, not only the people directly involved, but people who are peripheral to it. All right, because we could then agree that the change that we're trying to look for is the purpose we're looking at is something that we all agree is something we want. That's the main thing, and that we all feel good about where we want to go. All right. So let's look at this next thing, working for a positive change. So whenever we talk about vision, mission, statement, we're always looking for something positive. You're never going to see, at least in the real world around us, you're never going to see a vision and mission statement that is negative in nature. It may have negative implications. So for example, when Digicel first launched, what was its vision? Anybody remembers it? All right, so you may not remember, but the vision statement was a very short statement.
Not to provide bigger, better service?
Something along those lines. It wasn't bigger, better. They wanted to become the #1 mobile service provider in Trinidad and Tobago. That was their purpose, #1, right? Now, that has a negative implication because it means in the market, there was only one other provider at the time of mobile services. We still only have one other provider at this point in time. It meant that the negative or the downside to that would be that there had to be a #2, which would have been Be Mobile, right? At that point in time. And even around that time, Be Mobile emerged as well, because when Digicel came on, it was Digicel versus TSTT, and TSTT remarketed the mobile aspect of their cellular services into the Be Mobile that we have, and they chose that green color and everything. Digicel chose that red color, so that you could see immediately that the way in which they position themselves in the market was to position themselves almost as direct opposite, green versus red kind of thing. All right, but again, in both instances, the end all and be all of their existence is to either replace each other in the market. So that's negative in terms of where, if you work for Be Mobile or you work for Digicel, one company doing better than the other meant that the other company was not doing as well. Now, the fact of the matter is that you'd never see them write up a negative mission or vision statement. Everything is couched in positive language. All right. So, and you have to be careful with that, because the positive change process that you're looking at, it means, can imply that whatever which by whatever means necessary can become relatively dangerous for us to look at it. And that is an important. The change that improves the human condition that does not intentionally harm others. Now that's some aspect here they're talking about. The relational leadership model supports positive change. That is, change that improves the human condition and that does not intentionally harm others. Now, that's an important caveat to this particular direction that they're looking at them. Because when you're looking at making a positive change, sometimes there is negative fallout that takes place in the environment or society or the area or environment that you're working in. Because, all right, so let's say from an international standpoint, the movement away from fossil fuels and into renewable energies is a good thing, isn't it? Would you agree with that? In terms of improving the health of the planet and the air and quality of water and that kind of stuff. Yes? So the intention there is to to take us into a better type of existence. But unintentional is that the people who are currently involved in coal and fossil fuels will lose their jobs. Countries that are dependent upon the sale of oil and coal and natural gas will eventually lose revenue sources. So that's an unintentional harm that other people will be affected by. You're following me? That was something that we saw happen when large economies started to move more into electric vehicles and stuff like that. It's going to play a role in the future. And that is likely to have a negative impact on Trinidad and Tobago because we are fossil fuel dependent. You think sometimes differently about that. All right. So this whole concept of positive change is something that we have to be looking at across the board because people don't want to be associated with something that they view as being negative. They would prefer to be associated with something that's positive. So if we think about the change, for example, that Hitler had suggested to his people in his society during his time, they obviously viewed their goals and objectives as something positive for them and for the people of Germany. But what was the end all and be all of it? It was a negative, overall negative. All right. So what is positive to one can be negative to another. So this is something that we have to pay attention to and be aware of the fact that we need to think beyond what is going to be good for ourselves and look at the broader impact of the change that we're trying to make. And try to take that into consideration. Now, there's a chapter, the last two chapters actually, leading change is going to be one of those chapters that we have to assign one of the groups to repeat their presentation, but it will deal more specifically with managing change and that type of stuff that you'll be able to look at in the future. All right, any questions on this area of looking at change? No? All right, so when you're engaging in change, change is inherently difficult for an organization. So let's say, right, well, if we look at the circumstances that we faced in the latter part of 2019, when we had to move quickly from face-to-face classes to online and presence, a lot of students and lecturers were very, what's the word I want to use? They were very hesitant and almost combative towards making that change. But eventually it became impractical for us to not for people to hold up against the change. But I know a lot of people had problems. So, and the reason for that is because we get comfortable with doing things the way we normally do them. And that unfreezing that this slide talks to. See if I could find, there's a particular phrase, right? So that unfreezing is usually caused by something called a trigger event. So in our case here, the pandemic caused the issue, having to unfreeze the system that we had set up for developing our for teaching and serving the student body. And now that we're in a situation where we could kind of go back to some face-to-face classes, what we found happening was that students don't want, well, the majority of students don't want to go back to face-to-face classes. They prefer the online. Now, this is a nice class for me to talk to you all about it, because how did you all feel about that, and why do you all prefer the online environment? Some honesty here would be nice, guys.
So it is more convenient for me.
Uh-huh.
And I think I heard they closed down the Tobago campus. So
No.
well, that was after the fact. I don't know if that is true, but I heard so.
No, they didn't close the campus. What they did is they reduced the amount of space they were renting in the campus.
Okay, all right.
Right.
But
and rather,
it's convenient for me. I mean, for a lot of reasons. Because
right.
look, for example, I'm still in work, but yeah.
And you could still participate in class.
Yeah.
Yes, it gives you more flexibility. And rather, so you opened up your microphone. Did you want to contribute something?
Yes, sir. I like that it's online as well because I work full time as well, so it's easier for me to come into class and then have the recordings to go over if I do miss a class. So it's much more convenient than being in person.
Right. Okay. Anybody else wants to add their conclusion or their opinion to this discussion?
So I do.
Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
In business orientation, I had to do a project on the campus, learning about the vision, the mission, who are the teachers, who are the staffers, everything.
Right.
And because we were online, we were able to really sit down and able to research and everything. Whereas if you're in person, it would have been a problem to see who they are and what department and so on. So it was really, I find the online is much better than doing it face to face.
Well, what do you miss from the face to face, if anything at all? Not just you and Michelle, but other people. What do you all miss from it? And
I didn't hear you. What is that, sir?
What do you miss from the face to face sessions, if anything at all?
The face to face, well, teacher like giving us well, if you have a problem, for example, math, if you don't have a problem and you're trying to figure it out, you have to figure it on your own or ask a friend whereas and if you're face-to-face in class, you'll be able to have a one-on-one with the teacher.
So have you been so online, have you ever been able to get on a one-to-one with your lecturer? Online?
Not really, but when you talk with him on the phone to
get clarification.
Some questions, yeah.
You know, that counts as one-to-one FaceTime, right?
Yeah.
In fact, you all that's one of the reasons why I created the WhatsApp chat group, because the one of the functions of that is if you're having issues, I can treat with you independently. I can call you and speak to you. We can meet online, that type of stuff. So again, there are methodologies that are being utilized here. All right, so let's come back to this. Thank you for your contribution, guys. Thank you for your contribution. All right. So again, when we talk about this unfreezing and then refreezing, making whatever change is necessary and then refreezing, what the theory tells us though is that we shouldn't when you go through the process of making change, what they're saying is that at the end of the day, you shouldn't just refreeze the organization, but kind of remain in a kind of slushy environment. Why? Because that slush allows you to make more changes or necessary changes if things are going to be changing in the future. And this is something that our organization has to work with, because the situation is dynamic and it changes rapidly, so that we need to be able to address changes in the environment as quicker than we probably do at this point in time. So that, but probably a lot faster than were able to deal with it in the past. So that, and along the way, whenever you make change, you're likely to lose people along the way as well. That's something that that happened within the organization, because for some people who are absolutely inflexible, they would not make changes, and they may find themselves in problems with the organization, as the organization doesn't have a choice but to respond. Consider all of those businesses that you've probably noted that shut down during the pandemic because they couldn't transition into a form that allowed them to operate in a manner that facilitated the lack of requirement for a brick and mortar building. So, moving online was going to be an important part of the survival of an organization during a period like that. And once you create that online presence, it is important for you to maintain it, because you realize that it's an even wider market if you allow for that particular situation. One of the things that I've noticed in the last budget is the government actually wants to encourage that movement towards an online economy, because it eases up the business activities. So, I mean, I know a lot of you all here probably do a lot of online shopping. Is that correct? You don't have to say so. You can just put up your hand if you want. Do you participate in online shopping?
I would too. But remember, so they want to get everything, they want to have paperless transaction now.
Yeah, well, that's
right.
electronic transfers, and electronic transfers work better for online transactions. That's an important element that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
And that's part of the flexibility issues that you're talking about. Even if you go to a brick and mortar building, there are times when I go to organizations to make payments to them, and I don't actually have to give them cash, because I just go to my phone and transfer funds into their accounts, or make a direct debit transaction, or direct credit those are electronic transactions. Of course, what you have to do is you have to look after the issue with your security of your what do you call it, identity. So that's something you have to pay attention to, especially in this day and age where people are stealing people's things. So, all right, so we talk about that whole transition and positive change. So again, remember always that positive and negative is relative. Somebody will always be negatively impacted by a change that's made within an organization. It's something you have to take into consideration, and you can't avoid it, because change is difficult for everybody. If you ever want to read up a little bit about that, if you can ever find, I think on YouTube there's some little animated clips about something called "Who Moved My Cheese," and that actually speaks to the concept of change and the various reactions people have to change. So it's something that you could look at. Interestingly enough, one of the issues with making change is that it's time consuming. I know, for example, when we were making the transition from the National Technicians Program into the Associate Degree Program, that was took a lot of time for us to make that adjustment moving forward, to be able to take the degrees over into that, well, I should say the diplomas and certificate programs into that area. It was really it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of work from individuals and groups within all the organizations to move us towards the associate degree programs and the credit-based systems and so on. So those are things that we want to talk about when you're dealing with it. All right, so let's get to this next aspect of the leadership program. The relational leadership program is inclusive. So when we're speaking about inclusive, we're speaking about understanding. All right, so there are a couple of things here we have to. Being inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging with diversity in views, approaches, styles, aspects of and aspects of individuality, such as sex or culture. And this would add multiple perspectives to your activities. Now, this is the challenge that's going to face anybody participating in this model and anybody in leadership positions. Well, there are some leaders who are not inclusive. Let's say that up. They're very exclusive in their thinking. They don't want certain types of people to be around them. Some people say that, being inclusive is a weakness because it means you are, from their perspective, it means that you are you're lowering your standards or changing your standards. In our modern environment, we are asking you to be inclusive in your practice of leadership. Now, inclusive of people who are similarly minded is easy, but inclusive of people who are diametrically opposed to some value system that you hold to be special to you is where your problems are going to come in. And that is the challenge that you're going to have to face in relation to that. And most of that is because we are going to stop listening to people once we start to get involved with that type of activities. Does this make sense to you guys? This inclusive issue? So the concept that comes out from this inclusiveness here is that we need, as leaders, to be inclusive in our behavior, listening with empathy, communicating with civility, facilitating inclusion of others. I am not telling you. One of the things that I always encourage people to do is to try and understand the position that people have or the reasons why they may have developed ideas or concepts different to you. It may be where they were born, how they grew up, their background, environment, nurturing, whatever took place. But the whole concept is, rather than spending your energy disagreeing and trying to change individuals, it is better for you to probably spend a little more time understanding why people have developed those particular types of attitudes rather than trying to be closed-minded towards them, because it takes a lot of energy to hate. It takes less energy to be more inclusive. All right. And the thing about it is that when you become more inclusive, it leads to an organization that is stronger in the sense that it is shaped by varying perceptions of things. Remember, we are creatively, if collectively stronger, collectively smarter when we include other people around us. Because if you have a group of 10 people and of the 10, 5 are not inclusive in nature, it means that, or you're not including five out of 10, you're only working with half of the tools that you have available in that group. If all 10 individuals are contributing their perception, their ideas, their technical strength, their knowledge, and their efforts into the accomplishment of the goal, then you're much going to be collectively stronger. But if you are pushing people away from the actions or the activities of the group because you have problems with how they live their lives, they're gay, they have body piercings, or they see themselves as transgender or something along those lines. Those are the issues that you want to be, or worse yet, they're not of the same race. Those are the kind of divisive types of activities that make us weak, allow us to be manipulated by other people, because we are allowing our differences to define us and not our similarities. And that is the negative aspect of not being inclusive. Similarly, one of the things that that comes up is if you have too many people who think alike in a particular organization, they're unlikely to find solutions to difficult issues that require variations in your perception. Because if everybody's thinking the same way, then where are you going to get an alternative view to looking at an issue or problem or a direction that you want to take? Sometimes you need an outsider to look at something to get a more objective view of a problem or issue that's facing you as an organization. Because remember, you as a leader, you cannot make all the decisions yourself. You have to utilize the skills and talents of individuals outside of yourself to be able to influence where you move, where you go in terms of organization, the organizational growth and improvement. So as a leader, your job is to get those people involved, to pull them in and have them influence, be open enough and inclusive enough to listen to their contributions and listen to the input and the strength that they have in terms of being able to find some sort of solution to you. All right. So there are a couple of things here that you could read about if you do get a chance to go through and read the slides itself in terms of the impact of having all these different value structures facing you. Now, in the textbook here, they're focusing on the issues and differences and variations that exist in the United States because they have so many different varieties that may be affecting them. In Trinidad, we have some what's the word? We have to deal with a race issue in Trinidad and Tobago. That's one of the things. We also have homophobia to deal with here in terms of the lack of inclusivity. We also have the dynamic of rich and poor, or those people who come from different parts of the country that may be viewed as being what do they call them, ghettos and all this kind of stuff. And those kind of differences is what we focus on. We focus on, you come from a crime-ridden area, you come from this area, bandit and that kind of stuff. But we're not looking at the similarity of who we are as basically Trinidadians operating and working in the country today. We even have the relatively newer difference that's coming in terms of Venezuelans who have come to join us here because of these circumstances that they find themselves living in their own country. I mean, and consider how difficult it is for you to get up and leave your home, leave everything and everyone you know, and come to a different country to try and make a living. Consider the strength it must have taken for somebody, or for so many people, to get up and leave and walk away from a life of everything that you knew. You try and picture that in your mind. If you had to pick up and leave Trinidad, leave everything that you have here and everybody that you have here to try and start a new life in some other country, that is a seriously huge decision. And those individuals can bring to bear a lot of different perspectives and strengths into organizations if you understand how to be inclusive and bring them into the organization. It's an important thing that you want to do. You also need to practice the language of inclusivity. So we have to use the word we a lot instead of the word I. So whenever you're engaging in conversations with people and you just can't say it, you have to mean it. But once you start to say I this, I that, I the next, it starts to kind of like, well, there's no room for us kind of situation. But if you continuously utilize that word we, all right, so what we want to do is this and what we want to do is that and so on. And we'd like to make these kind of decisions, or we'd like to get this moving. So that movement from the I to the we is going to be an important language change that you should utilize when you're trying to inculcate an inclusive environment. So the inclusive behaviors require mindset changes. It requires that we stop worrying about why people are different and understand them, and understand, more importantly, sorry, understand why there are differences and accepting those differences as being normal. Stop prejudging people based upon the preconceptions of what life is like to us and our own values and standards. Understand that there are varying levels of standards and values that exist in the world around us, and we have to be more open to them. The older you are, the more difficult it tends to be. The younger you are, it tends to be easier. That has been the observation generally across the board. So that's something that you want to do. Another activity that you want to be able to look at is being inclusive in decision making. So how many of y'all, when you're operating with groups, do use voting as a method of making a decision? Let's say in a slightly larger group that you all will end up in eventually. If you all end up in a fairly large group, 5, 6 people, 7 people, voting is one of the methods that you can utilize for making decisions. Not so a decision is made based upon the amount of support you could gather for it. Now think about this. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have some of the lowest voter turnout in terms of determining our political leadership. Now, that means roughly about we have roughly about 30% of 30 to 40% of the country who vote. We have about 60% of the country that don't vote. So you have about 2/3 of the country who don't vote. And you have a minority of individuals who vote based upon their political preferences. And that minority of individuals determines government and policy and procedures for a period of time for everybody. Now, how do you think the people who voted against your decision would feel? Now, to avoid a whole set of things, what ends up happening is that those people who didn't vote or who voted against feel alienated from the main group that's taking place there. And that's one of the impacts. That does not lend itself to inclusive decision-making techniques that you can utilize in organizations or small groups or even larger groups. What you might try to find or utilize is something called consensus. Now, what is the difference between voting and consensus? So consensus is where you make a decision based upon the input of all of the members of your group or your organization. Now, this is difficult and it tends to be time consuming to engage in, but consensus decision making tends to improve inclusive behaviors. Why? Because if I get an opportunity to say, well, I think we should do this, do that, and part of my choices come up as part of the decision, I feel partially responsible for, or feel partially I approve basically of part of the decision that comes up. So that I feel as if I've been listened to and that my position has been taken up with it. So that means that I will support this decision, although it doesn't fully reflect how I feel. At least parts of my thoughts are there and my feelings are there. And more importantly, even if none of my thoughts are there, I might have the opportunity I have the opportunity to be included in the decision-making process, as opposed to a decision was made, we voted, and this is the way we go in. Okay, so that is a better method or model to move into inclusive behavior. So not only your language, not only your perception and ideas and acceptance of people, but also your methods of decision making can assist with inclusive behavior. Now, sometimes when you're making decisions as a leader, you don't have the opportunity or the time to be able to wait on a group to make a decision. So, and that's an area that the second group or the third group of one of the chapters is going to be presenting on teams and groups, and that's that this area is going to come up in terms of negotiating conflict resolution, consensus modeling, and stuff like that. So we'd see that come up again in more detail later on. All right. We also have to remember that not only are the people of the group itself or the organization involved or affected by the decisions, but we also have to think about those people who are peripheral, shareholders and stakeholders, which is those who have some responsibility or share or interest in what we do, and those people who have a stake in the change that we're planning. So if we were to look at shareholders of COSTAT, it would be your parents or people who support you in the journey that you're taking, maybe your spouse or your children. Those are your shareholders because they have an interest in your development. And the stakeholders to COSTAT and the college would be the employers and businesses and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Those are stakeholders because what we do here, though they're external to the organization. So when we say internal to the organization, it will be staff, students, and faculty, right? That includes everybody who is inside the organization. But outside of the organization, there are other people that what we do, we need to make sure that we include them in the decision making because what we do can impact upon them. All right? And that's important for us to think about in terms of what's going on. And that also adds to being inclusive. So we also have to broaden our perception of to whom should we also be inclusive. Now, it's not meant that they will pay an overarching or critical decision, make part of our decision, but they need to be taken into consideration when we're making changes, especially if we're making changes of significant, insignificant matters. All right. So those are things that we want to talk to and talk about and how we deal with them. So one of the strategies I know that we utilize with our stakeholders is to create but there's a technique we use at forum discussions, and we get representatives to come in and we do a had done some of these and I can't remember what it is, the phrase for it. We do some we do short meetings and we record the meetings to determine you know, to record the input from all of the different people in the organization, all of the different stakeholders, and try to get ideas from everybody to see where how they feel about it and that kind of stuff. So their input is taken into consideration, and this is something that this is a matrix here that will tell you where people are likely to fall in terms of their how they feel in relation to the issues that you're going to be coming up with when you start to make changes. So for your external group stakeholders and shareholders, so you could have those that are supportive, and that's because they have their perspective is they highly support it, and it's a great importance to them. So like parents would tend to fall into this area. They're very supportive of positive change in the college because their children, it's of high importance to them because it's their children's future and development. High importance here, you might have people who have high opposition, and it's of high importance. So employers might fall here, some employers, because they see the change in maybe the program, if we're making program changes. They may not agree with the position that the college is taking in terms of transitioning the training from one area to another, but it's of high importance to them because they depend upon the college to provide their employment or labor requirements for the thing. So those are the kind of the positions they can take. All right, problematic, low priority. Those are the different responses we can expect from external stakeholders or shareholders. Now, one of the things that we want to do is to try and avoid the low priority individuals and problematic individuals. You don't want to be able to deal with people who are antagonistic and encourage people who are supportive. Dealing with antagonistic is not a negative thing. It's an opportunity for you to find out what their issues are and try to assuage their problems by looking at, well, what are the changes that we're making that's going to be negative from your perspective? And it gives you an opportunity to present to them where you believe it may be able to meet their requirements in a better way. And obviously, dealing with individuals like that, you'll be able to make sure that you're not going to make negative changes to your program that would be changes to the program that will negatively impact upon the people who are using your product. That's something that you want to pay attention to. In our case, we have to look at it in terms of what's happening to our students when they leave and they graduate, when they go to work, what's happening in the workplace. All right. Okay, so now we come to the area of empowerment. So we talked about this as one of the 5 major areas here. So empowerment is exactly what that means. It means devolving power from the leader to the followers. And it's important that we understand that the mindset here is one of giving your power away. All right. As empowerment has 2 dimensions: the sense of self that claims ownership, which means you want to encourage people in the organization to take control of things, to take part in the process and take ownership of parts of the process in the organization. And 2, a set of environmental conditions that promote the full involvement of participants by reducing the barriers that block the development of individual talent and involvement. So the second aspect here is about you as a leader creating the conditions necessary to encourage that ownership. All right. So 1, you want to promote that sense of ownership among your employees, and 2, create the environment to encourage that and support that behavior. Far too often, many leaders are, what's the word I want to use? They are threatened by members and employees in particular, and followers in organization taking control of aspects of the organization and creating problems. They see it as a problem and they see it as a negative that they have to stamp out, because they see it as somebody taking control of what they want. And that is something that we have to look at from that perspective. You need to be able to let go of that and encourage more people to take control. Because remember, at the end of the day, as a leader, your job is to create leaders, to empower people to take your job, in essence. Because none of us are going to be here forever. Let's put it that way. All right. All right. How do you claim empowerment? Empowerment is claimed by understanding that you have a legitimate right to be in the organization, to say what you want to say, and to feel it. Now, I'm not telling you go and cuss the people, right? I'm telling you just take your time and express what you feel about it in a civil manner. Try and don't insult people and leaders and such like that. Encourage people to be able to state what they want, why they want it, that type of stuff. Try to encourage that type of communication. All right. And try and get those people who kind of naturally feel, the extrovert type of individual needs to encourage the introvert type and tell them, you should get involved with this. You have a right to be here. Tell us what you think about and how you feel about it. And that's something that happens in some classes a lot. You have a lot of people who feel fine standing up and saying things, but they don't feel. You have others in class who don't feel that way. They tend to, and I mean, I can see that in class. I can tell from everybody here who actually is okay with speaking up. and those who don't speak up. All right. And as a leader, you need to encourage that type of thinking and encourage people to, want to speak their piece, so to speak. So you have to actually work at it. So like you have to exercise that thing. You also have to create the empowerment environments, because you can't give people power and then punish them for if they make a mistake. Let's put it that way. I remember that situation took place where it's a situation where you give power to somebody, you withhold resources from them to actually get the job done, and then you you punish the students you punish the individuals, actually the students, you punish the students when they make a mess or they make mistakes, and you ridicule them for it too. Because at the end of the day, they tried something and didn't work, but at least we can learn from that mistake or learn from the failure. And that is important as a leader, to encourage that type of activity. You want to mitigate against errors taking place or mistakes taking place or even serious issues, but you want to encourage people to do it. Fully making sense? All right. So there's a section that of presentations that will take place on, here it is, with chapter presentation 9, which we have to align somebody to, on power and influence, that will deal with this area in a lot more detail in terms of the source of power, how power arrives, how people use their power, and that type of stuff, that type of thing. But more importantly, what we have to understand is that we have to, as leaders, empower the individuals in our organizations to become leaders themselves. So we have to empower them by giving them opportunities to do the things that we're looking at. And we have to stop looking at power as a zero-sum game. Zero-sum means all power is mine, none for you. We have to look at it as starting to move towards a more collaborative approach and collegial approach. We have to be able to move towards that sharing of power, and unfortunately, especially in terms of a lot the older individuals in our society, and even some of the young people who have grown up with this whole concept of power is mine, and that type of stuff. That conventional view is not something that we're trying to encourage in this. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a game in which we start to share and we approach things by sharing our power and giving up the power, because at the end of the day, the more you empower somebody else, the stronger your organization becomes, and the more dynamic the organization will become, because there's more the powerful resources available within your organization to be able to achieve the goals that you want to do. All right. So in terms of the different sources of power, as I said, all of this will be dealt with when that chapter is presented. Expert power, referent power, legitimate. These are sources of power, coercive, reward power. These are sources of how we arrive at positions of power, understanding what power does and how it is utilized. All those things, you all will deal with that chapter in a lot more detail than this does here. All right, let's see if any critical issues. Nope, all of this is self-empowerment. So this might be interesting to go through. Muriel presents 6 methods through which you might become empowered. So if you are a follower and you want to become more empowered in your organization, start by educating yourself. All right, discovering and sharing information and knowledge, because a lot of times we feel as if we don't know enough to be able to speak up in an organization or speak up in a meeting. So if you feel that way, then learn more about it. All right. The second way is by leading, which means taking opportunities to lead and lead others. It can be in smaller groups, smaller organizations. Take a chance and take the lead in something. Structuring. Structure, which is arrange a day, bring people to the table, changing the policies and procedures, which means in your day-to-day arrangements and stuff, what you want to do is do things to be able to take control. All right, have organized meetings, bring people together and have discussions and take charge of the organization, take charge of the meeting. Providing resources, which is making sure that if you hand over power to somebody or power is handed over to you, ensure that the resources necessary to do the job is available. Mentoring, maintaining a relationship between your leader and yourself, or if you're the leader, between yourself and the people with whom you're mentoring, to be able to encourage them and support them in terms of making that decision. And then, of course, actualizing, taking on the activities and taking on and doing these things to be able to empower. And then, of course, doing the things to claim it, speaking out at meetings. When they ask you when people ask a question and anybody has a problem with this, or is there anything, speak up. Don't sit back and just accept the status quo of what's going on in an organization. This is one of the reasons why a lot of meetings in organizations get held on a Friday evening. It's because they're trying to minimize the amount of talk back they will get, simply because they don't want the opposition. They want people to just sit back and hey, this is enough, you all have to do this, blah, blah, blah. That kind of stuff. It's what's the word I want to use? It's horrible when I see that technique being used in meetings, especially with leaders who feel threatened by the members of their organization. It's truly amazing sight to see a leader duck, literally, and trying to manipulate people to stay away from answering questions and stuff. I've seen it in practice, and it's amusing, but at the same time, it's unfortunate to look at. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is providing opportunities for other members of your organization to rise to those positions of power in your thing. Part of empowerment is mattering and marginalizing, which means what happens when you empower people is you make them feel that what they think and what they say and how and what they do matters to you and matters to the organization. And that has a beautiful impact on people. When they feel that what they do is important, they actually take on more responsibility in the organization. They want to contribute, and they pay attention to what's taking place because what they feel matters. Now, I mean, ask yourself this question. As opposed to that, if you ignore people and you belittle them and that type of stuff, then you're going to marginalize them. And people who are marginalized don't feel as if they contribute, they don't feel as if they matter, and therefore they are very apathetic towards organizations and apathetic in the organization. And as soon as a different opportunity comes up, they will leave and go. Now, an example of that I want to show you is in organizations like COSTAT, for example. In our organization, we have people at different levels of the organization. And I've come across circumstances where faculty in particular is very standoffish from the staff that does custodial work, cleaners. And the thing about it is, without the cleaners, we can't actually use the building. We can't actually use the facilities if it's not cleaned. And yet still, because they're cleaners, they treat the people who are cleaners as if they're non-persons. And that is something that unfortunately tends to create, like these little cliques or cliques in the organization, where cleaners only line with other cleaners and lecturers only line with other lecturers. That's not the way you want to build an organization. You don't want cliquing to take place because some cliques feel as if they're being marginalized, whereas other cliques feel as if they're the ones that actually matter in the organization. You have to avoid and minimize the amount of marginalization that takes place, because Marginalization is something that creates a negative feeling in your organization that leads to bad things happening in the long run. All right. Empowerment. Well, we talked about creating the environment that we're talking about here. So that's something that you're going to have to work on, making sure that one, you allow for inclusivity, so different people being able to. You reduce the fear factor of humiliation. This is something that happens in with teachers, for example. They will ask the question, well, everybody understands, and if somebody gets up and says, no, I don't, I didn't get this, and then the teacher starts to humiliate the student, then what's going to happen? Um, uh, then what happens is students stop asking questions in your classroom, and that is something that because nobody wants to get humiliated, because I mean, why would that happen? And unfortunately, that's something that some lecturers do. You know, they they'd ask question, or student asks a question in the classroom because they didn't understand something, and you know they've been told they're stupid or they're silly or something along those lines. Yeah, be careful with what you're doing, because those kind of attitudes, that type of practice, does not create for an empowering environment. If you make fun of people, if you are too controlling, or if you are um, you have zero tolerance for mistakes and accidents that or failure, then that does not help to create that empowering environment, because you are not being supportive of that activity that's taking place there. All right, so y'all can look at this section in a little more detail. And it speaks to whether or not you as a leader would be willing to give up your responsibility and give up your power to other people in the organization, um, if you believe that that's the case. Now, even if you give up your power, you're not necessarily giving up the responsibilities of things up, but sharing your responsibilities is an important element that we need to do. And now we come to one of the more critical parts, the ethical and moral values. So this model sits upon a clear understanding that ethics and morals are critical to the nature of leadership. So one of the things we start with, what is ethics? Ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules concerning what is right and what is wrong. Okay, that's ethics. Now, on the other hand, let me talk about the origin of the word and stuff that comes from. Ethical standards are established by our society. They're either established by organizations and their associations. So, for example, if you're an accountant, you have what they would call standard operating procedures, and they also have standards of ethical values and behaviors. If you're a nurse, you have to take the Hippocratic Oath along with medical practitioners. Each profession, for instance, students in this college has the student handbook, which governs the rules of student behavior. You're familiar with that, right? Yes? No? You should have come across that when
I became familiar when I had to do the assignment for business orientation.
Yep.
To do the research on getting the teachers
Right.
and
Roles
all
and
that.
responsibilities, yes. And as a
Yes.
lecturer, I myself, I also have rules to follow as well. Those are the ethical values that I expected of me. Now, when we started to talk about so those rules and ethical standards are supposed to guide my behavior, so general behavior, all right? Then when we have morals, so we remember we talk about ethical and moral leadership. So what are morals? Morals are those principles of right or wrong arising from one's conscience or sense of good and evil, pertaining to the discernment of good and evil, instructive of what is good or evil, bad. So morals are more commonly influenced by our religious and personal beliefs. So one of the issues here is we have ethical values coming from organizational standpoints about what we should do that is right or wrong, acceptable or not acceptable. Then we have morals, which is speaking to what we consider is right or not right, but what is good and what is evil. Now, should there be a correlation between the two? Of course there would be. And when is it that we be when is it that good and evil, right and wrong becomes ambiguous? That's an interesting question, I think, because a lot of us, in this world that we live in, a lot of decisions that we make are what we call morally ambivalent. Ever heard that phrase before? Do you understand what it means to be morally ambivalent? Have any of you all ever encountered behaviors or activities that are morally ambivalent or vague, ambiguous? Yeah, I know all your line, right? Or you just don't want to say. But once you're alive and you're working and living in this world, you will confront decisions, behaviors, and activities that will walk a line between what is right and wrong based upon the value structures that you have. And this is what the relational leadership model is pointing to, is that there's such a wide or a very diverse nature of moral values, and morals change. Morals and ethics change over time because society looks at some activities that at one point in time is seen as socially acceptable, and at a later point in time, they're not. So a lot of things that may have been happening in school when I was in school as a student is no longer seen as being acceptable in our current life. For instance, in my days, we used to get strokes all the time. We used to get licks all the time as part of our punishment. But now, in today's environment, corporal punishment is no longer seen as a viable method of disciplining children, right? In the school system, not so? Additionally, certain types of behaviors are more permissive now than they were in the past. All right, and that's a situation that we have to look at. That's a situation we have to look at a lot because there are numerous circumstances in life around us where the value structures that we have grown up and developed in is evolving as the world becomes more modern, and it's changing as the environment we exist in becomes different or changes as it moves along. And it challenges some of the values, some of the things that we hold as moral values or ethical values at this point. And it challenges it, either in a good way or bad way. Right? And that's something that we want to look at. Now, at the end of the day, though, the model that we're looking at is going to be looking at the fact that leadership in this model is values driven. So it's going to be important for us to identify the values that we hold that govern our behavior as an individual and the values that govern our behavior as leaders in organizations. Now, there's a cross purpose here that we need to pay attention to, which is those values guide our behavior in relation to our ethical and relationship process. But oftentimes we might find ourselves in a circumstance where there is a disparity between the value structures or the value systems of an organization and our own personal value systems. And that is where a challenge takes place that creates problems of a situation where you start to feel a sense of discomfort. What is referred to really is as cognitive dissonance, because something in the job or something that the job or the organization is asking you to do does not sit well with you in terms of your value system. Now, have any of you all ever operated in an environment like that, where your personal values don't correlate with the values of the organization? Anybody? You're all hearing me, right?
Yes, sir, but I've never had that happen. Well, I've never been in that situation.
But what about, have you ever come across a situation where your value system conflicts with somebody else's or value system around you? Or have you ever been in a situation where your decision making becomes morally ambivalent? All right, don't answer that question. Probably. You don't have to tell me what it is. Just saying yes or no, basically.
Then yes.
Yeah, all right, good. No, and then I admire and reward your honesty, because we've all come across situations like that, whether you want to admit it or not. But the point is, you will get an opportunity to speak to that and write about it when you look at the presentations. There are 2 presentations that deal with moral purpose and integrity. So you have presentation 3, integrity and moral purpose, and presentation 5, which deals with courage and moral leadership, from 2 different authors. That's because those 2 concepts are critical to the development of the ethical value system and moral structure that sits behind the relational leadership. Because again, if you're talking about the nature of relationships that we develop between leaders and followers, then the value systems that exist within us give us the bedrock upon which how we develop those relationships with other people. They guide our entire behavioral patterns. All right. Now, I have seen, and especially in the political sphere, I've seen so many politicians say one thing and do absolutely different things in terms of the type of relationships that they foster and the type of ethical decisions that they make. And so when you all are dealing with this, you all are going to come across decision-making models, and you'll be asked to examine personal dilemmas that you may have faced when you're making decisions in your own day-to-day activities. So those are the things I want you to take into consideration. But the critical element that we're looking at here is how important ethics and morals becomes to the leadership model. And it's not only about, well, it sits heavily upon what you believe, but we also have to remember that what we believe can change over time. All right. And those values, those freely chosen personal beliefs, the values Lewis talking about it here, are our guiding principles in our lives. And if some of your guiding principles in lives are mistaken because they've arrived at through, you know, our past influences and past activities or past environments that we've grown up, it may simply mean that we need to revise or review those types of principles that guide us in our current lives. Again, in your self-analysis, this is one of the things that you're all going to be paying attention to, be looking at in a great amount of detail, because you have to pay attention to the nature in which how your values have arrived at, how you've arrived at the kind of values that you have in life, and then start to work out, start to evaluate it from the point of view of whether or not the value structures that you hold are relevant to today's society, or are they good values, you know, in terms of how you feel about everything around you. And you're going to have to be able to engage in some serious self-analysis to be able to determine and say to yourself, you know, am I ready this kind of individual? Am I an upright, honest, and ethical person? You know, do I treat people fairly? Am I inclusive in my thinking? Or am I judgmental? Or am I dismissive of people? Do I, you know, what am I? Who am I as an individual? Which is why we have to pay attention to that, because it's important for you to understand where you're coming from an ethical position, and understand that ethical leadership requires a very good understanding of who you are from that position and what leadership. You don't want to become those kind of leader that says one thing and does something else, right? That is the worst type of leadership that you want to exhibit outside there. So it's important, and so important that we have 2 chapters that will deal with a lot of this stuff. But again, go through this and have a read, see what the main text starts to talk about in terms of this. It's one of those things that you want to probably pay attention to. All right. Have you ever been in a circumstance or situation where you feel as if the ethics of the situation was totally ignored? Anybody?
Yes, sir.
And how did it make you feel?
Very annoyed.
Very what?
Annoyed.
Annoyed. Annoyed,
Yeah.
and why did you feel annoyed?
Because if the ethics of the situation hadn't been ignored, we would have had a better outcome and it would have turned out much differently. And a lot of things could have been avoided.
All right, okay. All right. So one of the things I want you all to engage in terms of your evaluation of your leadership value structures is to run an exercise where you ask your question of what do I stand for, and how far am I willing to go to advance that position that you hold. All right, to do the right thing. Now, again, we have to be careful here. What is the right and what is wrong? So you have to pay attention to that. So in your evaluation of yourself, these are some of the things that you want to talk about. Leading by example. Well, of course, the whole thing in this model is going to be in relational leadership is to lead by example, which means you have to develop your skills and do all the things that we're talking about in terms of the 5 practices or concepts, and work on these things, and model the process, model the way forward, so that other people who may be looking at you as potential leaders will look at you as a great example to becoming the type of individual that you say you want to be. All right, so modeling the way is a really, really important thing. Like, look at what this guy says here, Emerson. What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. Implies an even greater emphasis on the importance of values being congruent with your actions. Your actions has to speak to what you say you are. There has to be congruence between the two. And that's something that a lot of leaders I have seen around me don't do. They say one thing and they do something totally opposite. And it leads to what Ms. Jacob was talking about there, that I always feel, one, disappointed about it, and two, I feel very uncomfortable, and I actually feel that cognitive dissonance as a result of it, because it doesn't sit right to be in an organization that says one thing but does something totally different, and it kind of makes me feel very dirty. When you're in and around that activity, you kind of feel like, yeah, I kind of ickiness. I tend to feel. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I feel a little icky about it, a little dirty, and ooh, I don't want to touch this kind of thing. Yeah, finicky about it, but it's something that you want to do, as I said, leading by example. That speaks to that whole situation I'll be talking about there. If you want to become a good leader, you have to exhibit these things, and you have to lead people not only by what you say, but more so by what you do. You have to exhibit all the things that you talked about as part of the process. Going through all the exercises that we talked about, you have to get that as part of the process. So that process, and it comes back now to the whole process that we're talking about here now, is you keep on doing things in this method. So method, it becomes you start to work and you do it again, and it means you don't do it just once, but it's a continuous cycle of change, improvement, reviewing. So part of the process that you have to engage in is reflection and rumination, thinking about what happened, why did it work, why didn't it work, and making adjustments and changes over time. Making understanding why this didn't work, why that didn't work. Those are important elements about the process. So once you understand the process, you keep on doing it over and over again, over and over again. So it's a never-ending process. Leaders always have to be going through sort of like birth and death cycles, because they have to always think about what did I do, what right, wrong, and so on, and start to look at that process over and over again. So the process from the being, knowing, being, and doing has to start that process all over and go through, evaluate yourself all the time, so that you make the necessary changes. We don't expect that you'll get everything right all at once. Nobody will be able to do that. In fact, at the very beginning, we said that this model is an inspirational model that is designed to inspire you towards becoming an ethical leader. But what it also means is that it's going to be something that you will have to take time to do. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So which is why the process requires that you keep on going through those different aspects of it and keep on working on it, so that you're able to make the necessary changes as you're going along. One of the things that I'd encourage you to do in your journey of this is to, create little journals, make little notations along the way of key things that happen as you're making the process doing this thing. All right. Meaning making. This is what they were talking about here in terms of trying to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and make sure what you're doing is meaningful to people in your thing. All right. See, reflective, challenging, collaborative, and caring. Those are the things. Being process-oriented means being aware of the dynamics among people. So you have to be aware of everything. Every time you participate in a group activity, you should spend some time after you've gotten through the activity to review what took place. What did you do? What did the other people do? What worked? What didn't work? That whole process. Because if you keep on having the same kind of outcomes with group work, then you're not doing enough about reviewing the process of what you've been doing. Why do we do the things this way, and how can we be more effective? Those are the questions you want to be asking when you go through this review process. Every time, at every stage, you should be looking at, is this working? Why did we do it this way? Why did we try something else? How can we be better at this? That is the whole point of doing things. Keep on doing things over and over again in the same way is the definition of insanity. Look at cooperation and collaboration. This is about group work or working in teams. Again, we have a tendency to focus on being competitive with each other, but the truth is that in the world we live in, we should not or ought not to be focused on competition, though competition is something that is kind of embedded in the system that we work in, the legal system, sports teams, free market system. Competition permeates that, and therefore it tends to have an impact upon the way in which we approach things. We have to do better than everybody. Why not we approach it from the perception of how can we all do this better? And that is a different paradigm. How can we work together to be better collectively? And that is the part of the process that you want to look at in terms of reviewing your activities. Because remember, you're the leader in the organization. You're not competing against everybody else. You are there to get people to work together to be able to bring out the best with them. And you have to show and, of course, lead by example when it comes to that. All right, so these are the key areas that they spoke about in terms of the process. But so we understand it's a process that we try to engage in over and over again so that every time we make the journey, we improve what we're doing, especially when we're dealing with how we manage our groups and activities moving forward. Meaning making is, making sure that what we're doing means something to think about it from the perspective of meaning making is about if you leave an organization, what impression do you leave behind? Will they miss you or will it not matter? And that's a challenge in every aspect of your life. Make what you do meaningful. And let it be that when you walk away from a situation and you've left it a better thing, not something that's worse off. All right. That's kind of like what you get from this thing. In your interactions with people, either as a follower or as a leader, make sure that what you leave behind or what you work on is meaningful for people across the board, meaningful for everybody. All right. It's difficult because it takes time, but at the end of the day, you want to be missed, that kind of stuff. You want to have made a difference then, all right? All right, so another aspect of it is to making meaning out of the process that you're involved with, which is one of the things that they speak about here is reflection and contemplation. One of the ways for you to actually record and reflect on things is to write about it, right? Stepping back from the action and asking what is happening, why is this happening, what does it mean, what does it mean for you specifically, and what can I learn from this? Now, it's difficult to engage in reflection and contemplation in the midst of something happening, but sometimes it might be the best time to do it while it's happening, especially if it's something that you view as being negative. It's even more difficult for you to reflect on something when it's good, because there's a chance that, why should I bother with reflecting on something that's going good? Because it's going good. But if you want to repeat that activity, you should reflect on what was happening and how it was done, so that you could capture the information and the data to be able to repeat that activity over and over again. So reflection and contemplation is a really important part of the process, which is why all of the writing activities that you're doing for this class is reflection writing. Journal writing to a point, but it's reflection writing across the board. That makes sense? All right. Endless drama in a group clouds consciousness. Interesting. All right. So, so this is the last aspect that comes up with the Lal Chan's coming back in again. That comes up in this chapter about the importance of reflection and contemplation, because it's not popular with people because it means taking time to sit down and do the reflection. Some people don't like it because it requires being honest with yourself. It's a practice art. It's something that you have to take time to get to do. All right. We used to do it a lot in organizations in the late 90s, early 2000s, where we'd be going on retreats. The organization or the department will go on a retreat and try and talk about things and reflect on what was going on, and try and speak truth to how we felt, especially trying to honestly appreciate how people felt about things when they happened, and given space and time to honestly accept what other people had to say about how they felt when you did this or when I did that kind of stuff. It's not something that's, because it tends to be conflict oriented, but it's something that's required because if you actually engage in this, especially if you're in significant relationships as well, this is a technique that you can utilize in relationships to be able to review what's going on in your relationship, to see whether or not you're tracking back into mistakes that you've made in the past, to be able to make major changes moving forward. All right. But we're talking about this from a leadership perspective, but of course you can take leadership in your relationships as well. The same thing applies here, but it's difficult to manage, but it's a useful thing to be done. But it is not popular, I'll tell you that. Reflection and contemplation is not a popular activity that people like to get involved in because of how emotionally taxing it can be to engage in this. Anybody here maintains journals or diary or anything along those lines?
Yes, sir.
Right. So you engage in reflection a lot of times, or maybe you just and journaling is something where you could just write about what happened on the day and that kind of stuff. But it offers you an opportunity to write about how you felt about it. But one of the things you can also add to it is to go back to some of the things that you've written about and reflect upon it from the perspective of, well, if I've done this and this is what's happening, and it gives you an opportunity to review the things and try and make some new decisions as to how you would proceed further, given certain circumstances or situations moving forward. What changes you might like to make to how you go about doing things. Those type of things are very important to look at. All right, so we're coming to the process, the summary here. And basically, I hope everybody's kind of understood the whole situation that we're looking at in terms of the model that we're talking about. It's a long chapter, and I just wanted to end on this to remember what we're looking at here. The whole relational leadership model is a process-driven system that requires that we're inclusive, we encourage empowerment, we are ethical in behavior, and we're governed by the purpose and vision of the organization, or the objectives of the organization. Each element of this model will be dealt with in more detail in different parts of the presentations that are to come. Any questions on this so far? Right, so I have Jacob here. Walker didn't make it today. Jacob, how are you going with preparations for next week's presentation? You and Walker getting your stuff together?
Yes, sir.
All right. Campbell, you and Bob. I spoke to Bob earlier. Campbell, how you feel about what's going on with your preparations for next week? Campbell?
Sir, this is Jacob again. I just had a question about the presentation, right?
Uh-huh.
Time-wise,
Yeah.
how long is our presentation supposed to be?
Well, it could vary based upon the methodologies you intend to use, but it should take you somewhere between 45 to an hour, hour and a half maximum.
Okay, no problem.
So yeah, you have a good bit of time, huh? But the earlier chapters are a bit shorter, and therefore they can probably be a lot less time in terms of presentation.
Okay,
All right.
no problem, sir.
Okay. So
I had one other question.
go ahead.
I know that we had groups. We're supposed to be doing 2 presentations, right?
You're supposed to?
We're supposed to be doing 2 presentations within our groups.
No, the option exists for some presentations later on, because I have two chapters that still have to be assigned presenters. So because you all go off earlier, you all get an opportunity to volunteer to do a later chapter if you also desire, based upon the outcomes of your presentations. But regardless of how you do, the last 2 chapters have to be presented by people from the class.
Okay, no problem, sir. Because I remember that one of the chapters that me and Jahim had
Walker?
volunteered to do. Yeah, we blank. We thought he was still doing it. So
Oh, no. So let's deal with the first set of chapters next week, and then we'll start to see how you all feel about doing later chapters. Still waiting for Ms. Campbell to give me some feedback, if it's at all possible. Maybe having audio issues. But Michelle, you said you're waiting on Ms. Campbell to get some stuff from her.
And we'll organize from there.
All right, okay,
Good.
cool. Okay. All right, so let me stop the recording there. Are there any questions that people want to ask at this point in time? No? All right, so I'm going to stop the recording now.